Thanks for joining us on Beyond the Sermon, the podcast of First Methodist Church in Collingswood, New Jersey. Our goal is not only to share our sermons, but to go beyond the sermon in conversation about what we're learning and what God is doing in our lives and in our community. This conversation is inspired by our 2023 sermon series for Lent, 7 Deadly Sins, the power of God to move us from death to new life. You can find more information about our church at fumccollingswood.org. Thanks for joining us for this conversation.
Let's talk about gluttony.
Oh, man. Honestly, that's probably one of my worst ones for many years.
I mean, I like to eat. I'm not going to lie.
I love to eat. Food, people that know me well know that food is a large part of my identity in regards to things that I enjoy participating in, exploring.
I did think about you when I said, foodies and stuff like that. I was like, hope he doesn't take offense to this.
No, because I remember when I first visited a young adults gathering at your house before I started here, and Meg was telling one of the young adults that had a trip planned for, I think, Idaho. She was like, Jeremy can tell you about a good restaurant within 50 miles of anywhere you're going in this country. And as she was sharing that, I checked my phone. I'd gotten a text, and a friend that was visiting Sedona, Arizona, went to a restaurant that I recommended and sent me a picture thanking me for recommending that restaurant. And so I like food.
And there's nothing wrong with liking food, right?
That is true.
God made food to be enjoyable. Even, you preached on Ash Wednesday from Genesis 3, and in there it says, the woman saw that the fruit was pleasing to the eye and good for food, and also profitable for gaining wisdom. Throw that part in. Yeah. But the fact remains, the food was created to be good, and we were meant to enjoy it. It was meant to bring us pleasure. That's what God wanted. So food isn't a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing. But in the quantities that I have had at some points and the focus I had on gaining those quantities, I have filled myself to the brim on multiple occasions and over the brim. And so my first question is, what is the fullest you've ever been?
The fullest I've ever been. Now, not because of gluttony. But I can remember one time we were in South Sudan, and they gave us this massive ball of cassava flour and water kind of mixture. That was kind of like their basic bread. In Arua, we called it Nyasa. I don't remember what they called it up in South Sudan, but so you would use that to kind of eat whatever stew or chicken or beans you were given. And that stuff was so filling, and it stuck to your insides so much that but being the missionary who they were honoring, and you wanted to honor their hospitality, I ate so much of that at that one meal, just trying to be a good guest. I felt so sick. And then I mentioned, in the sermon about the cream puffs, and again, felt so sick after eating 22, 23 cream puffs after whatever we had eaten at the event. It wasn't just we came into something and sat down and ate all the cream puffs. We had been there for the thing. And so, that would be another one. What about you? All this food you've eaten.
That's true. I realized, like you were saying, that in many cultures, being a good guest is eating as much as you possibly can.
Right.
And so going to Mexico all of these years, especially since I was a picky eater, believe it or not, when I was much younger, I was conditioned to believe that I am making other people happy if I eat as much as I possibly can. Particularly when I'm a guest. And so that just ended up becoming more of a habit of I'm making someone happy if I'm eating as much as I can. And so in Mexico, I've gotten very full many times, and now like people are disappointed if I don't have 3 or 4 portions at their home.
Yeah,
they're like, oh, we must have not done as good as the last trip because
you've set the precedent now.
Oh yeah, I set the precedent where if I had less than 15 tacos, people thought I was sick.
Yeah, sure.
That's
15 tacos.
That is really, really like the people, because our friends owned one of the taco places in the village. If I had 10 and I stopped there, they would question like what happened. Well, the times that I can think of that come to mind, 2 occasions. One is to celebrate graduating college, or at least finishing my college classes. Rebecca took me to Fogo de Chao in Philly, which was like a restaurant I dreamed of going to, and it's all you can eat steak, chicken, salad bar. But I didn't go.
Yeah, for those who don't know, it's a Brazilian steakhouse, and they come and they carve the meat right off right onto your plate.
And so I like got so full, did not drink or consume any alcohol, but I'd eaten so much that I was like, Rebecca, you're going to have to drive home. Yeah. Because I'm unsafe to drive.
You get the meat sweats going.
It was bad. It was horrible. And then another time we were visiting one of Rebecca's dear friends in Raleigh, North Carolina, and the boyfriend had just gotten into smoking. Not smoking cigars, smoking meat, the proper kind. He smoked 2 full racks of ribs, 8 pounds of wings, and then an 11-pound pork shoulder. And then she made multiple sides in like a catering bin. And so since the shoulder took so long, we filled ourselves on appetizers and wings and ribs.
Oh.
I was full before the 11 pounds of pork shoulder came out for the 4 of us. So they invited some neighbors to come over to help us eat the shoulder.
Yeah, that's a lot of
another
meat.
one that in addition to wanting to take us out to ice cream afterwards.
There's always room for ice cream though, Jeremy.
Oh my gosh.
I promise.
Yes, which always. I learned with your ice cream habits. Which, do you have a specific flavor that you go to?
Ooh, my go-to flavor is mint chocolate chip.
Oh, classic. Okay.
Yeah, my go-to would be Turkey Hills mint chocolate chip. Like, there's almost always one of those in our freezer.
Is that our first sponsor?
It should be.
But as you discussed in the sermon about how gluttony isn't always food-related, what thing of the world have you been gluttonous about or over in a certain season of life where you just found yourself constantly going back towards something that wasn't going to fulfill or be sufficient?
Even right now, social media has kind of been one of those things, like between Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. You know, there's so many days where I'll come home from, you know, sermon prep or meeting with people or whatever that day held, and just kind of like, I don't really have bandwidth to actually connect with people, but I want to feel like I'm connecting with people.
Yeah.
And so I'll start, you know, the scroll going, and then realize like, oh, there are actually people here in my house that I want to engage, and I would much rather be spending my time actually talking to my wife and children.
Yeah.
At the same time, I still find myself pulling out my phone and scrolling through. And
are you going to join us for the Lent challenge? You're a little late, but
I mean,
for the youth one,
I keep thinking about it, but then I'm like, maybe I should, because I feel kind of convicted about it.
I still do Facebook for work. So like if we get notifications for the church page or whatever, like I still have that.
Yeah. And I think that's part of how I justify it sometimes, because I do find out stuff that's going on in people's lives from the church. Yeah. I keep up to date with some of the news things that are happening within the Methodist Church through some of those channels and stuff. And so I think I justified a little too much with I'm staying up to date on what's happening.
Well, so that's where the youth challenge is simply for phones. It's like you can use tablets, you can use computers, you can do the media and social media and all that stuff there. But this is just to have that slight disconnection from the phone that's always on us.
Yeah.
And so that way you can still at work check up all that stuff, all the news, all the Facebook, whatever, to do that. But it's just on the phone to try and keep that down.
All right. You heard it here. I'm joining the youth for the Lent challenge, deleting Facebook, Instagram, and what's the other one? Twitter.
Yeah.
Off my phone.
Yeah.
I'll do it.
Yeah, no, I think it's been fruitful for me.
Well, thanks for making me feel convicted, Jeremy.
Yeah, you're well. No, it's. I realized I was like, why is my screen time so high? And then because I have Android Auto, it counts that as screen time when I'm in the car and my phone's plugged in. And so I was like, I was not on Google Maps for 4 hours yesterday.
Yeah,
but it all worked out. But no, I think that is one that a lot of us relate to, especially in this day and age. I remember back in high school, movies were occupying a lot of my time. And looking back, I don't know how I had that much time to devote to watching movies, but I was watching, on average, 10 movies a week.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, just after school on the weekend. And I primarily was watching, like, horror and zombie movies. And luckily, my mom is not here to hear that because she would not have been happy.
But Jesus is, Jeremy.
No, I know. And so, and it got to the point that by my senior year, I became the movie guy. So kids, when they were like, I'm in the mood for watching this type of movie or this or whatever, they would come to me for recommendations on what kind of movies to watch, or especially zombie movies I'd watch. I don't even know how many. But like that, in retrospect, I could have done so much more with my time.
Yeah.
And there was no there's no, my life has changed and I have a new direction because I watched the original Day of the Dead.
Yeah.
Like that hasn't brought fruit to my life. Yes, I can convert with some people that, have those interests and hobbies and might not relate on many other things, but I didn't need to watch 200 of them to be able to talk about a handful of the most popular films or whatever of that time. And so
and there are far better things we can give our time to, right, than
absolutely
zombie movies. Yeah. And how much time do we spend scrolling through whatever social media? And we don't even realize until we look back and we're like, oh wow, where'd that half hour go?
Are you ready for some scary statistics?
Yeah, sure.
So average teenager, supposedly by the powers that be that
American teenagers,
sorry, that should have been obvious. American teenagers.
I'm just clarifying so no one comes
average, back. Over 7 hours a day on the phone.
Yeah.
And preteens are on average over 5.
Yeah.
And I think in the country, no matter what age you are, as long as you have a smartphone, I think it's over 4.
I believe
a day is the average. And if you are spending 2 hours a day on average on your phone, that is a month of the year that you are spending on your phone.
That's sickening.
So if the average is 4 hours, then we're looking at 2 months of our entire year. Over a tenth of our time is spent.
Wow. So we're tithing our time to social media.
Yeah. And what are we getting back in return? That's the thing for me, is what am I actually getting back from my phone time? Like messaging and calls with people and things like logistical things to help ministry, to help organize. Like that's the scary and beautiful thing I think about cell phones, is that they do almost everything. Like, so you can't just equate the cell phone to being bad or being good. Like, it has everything available, but what are you using it for?
Yeah.
I think is what. So that's why I didn't want to say kids don't use your cell phones for Lent for this challenge.
Right.
Because there's still a lot of good that comes from their phones. And I have kids now that they average 20 plus minutes a day on their Bible apps, just the Bible app alone on their phones.
Which is a much better use of time.
Absolutely. And so if God's word is available on it, it's not a bad thing.
Right.
And so it's just, I'm interested to see, and maybe we'll even introduce onto the podcast as we get to the end of Lent, maybe some testimonies from our kids about what they experienced and how they were able to lean in and rely more on God during this time. Coming back to what we traditionally think of with gluttony, is that even though you explained it well in the service, I had a couple people ask me after the service, so how much can I eat? And so I'd like you to kind of revisit and maybe articulate in a new way kind of what does our relationship with food look like if we need it to survive, but we also don't want to be gluttonous.
Yeah, well, and I think that kind of goes back to where I tried to end up in the sermon, where we're talking about healthy rhythms. Yeah. Right. And there are times where Jesus asks us to give something up. He spent time in the wilderness after his baptism, before he started in on his ministry. He spent those 40 days in the wilderness fasting. Mm-hmm. And later, even in the Sermon on the Mount, we didn't talk about it. We're not going to talk about it in this part of the sermon series. But he says, when you fast, his assumption is that his followers are going to fast. Mm-hmm. And he gets questioned about that by the Pharisees and the Sadducees at different points, because they look around and they say, well, John's disciples, John the Baptist, his disciples fast and we fast. Why aren't your disciples fasting? And Jesus said that it was, when the bridegroom is there, it's not time for fasting, it's time for the feasting. Mm. And so because his presence was there, it was time for celebration. It was time to rejoice and to lean in. And so there are times where we need to feast. And we have different seasons throughout the year where we lean into that. After the fasting and reflection of Advent, as we're preparing and looking forward to Christ's coming, we celebrate at Christmas. And at the end of the Lenten season of preparation, we celebrate at Easter. And that mirrors some of the different feasts that the Israelites had. Not in a one-to-one kind of way, but the Passover. Right. Yeah, they weren't eating ham at Easter. But they ate the Passover lamb every year. And that was a time of celebration and remembering. And yes, there's some sorrow involved in that remembering, but there's also joy. We have to have fasting, we've got to have feasting. And then I think most of the time we need to find ourselves in that ordinary time of moderation and self-control. And that's going to look different for different people. Mm-hmm. I mentioned one of the boys saying, well, half a pizza, that's not gluttony for me.
Which I laughed at that because I was like, why are they stopping at half?
Right. Right. But as we continued the conversation in our home, but Meg was like, but for me, 4 pieces of pizza would be gluttony. Yeah. I don't need that. I don't want that. Yeah. I could eat it, but it's not actually helping me. But I think that's what it comes down to, is it's not going to look the same for every person. And it's not going to look for the same for the same person in every season of the year and every season of life. Mm-hmm. And so the key is, what's Jesus asking you right now? What's he doing in your life? What's he asking you to give up? What's he pointing out as something that you're leaning on too much, something that you're going to for relief or comfort before you go to him? Yeah. What are you doing for that pleasure hit, that because, everything else in life looks like it's not working out or it's stressing you out or whatever, and you're going to this other thing instead? Those are the things that we need to maybe scale back on. But it's as Jesus shows us. And it's not going to be the same thing for me as it's going to be for you at any given moment. And that's got to be okay. Yeah. No, it's really interesting because we talk about lift everything up to God in prayer. But have you ever talked to him about your dietary? Right. Choices. I was even listening to a guy on a podcast. He was like, I started asking God what outfit I should wear. And I was like, that sounds almost ridiculous. Yeah. And as he was talking about it, he was saying how he would put outfits on because of how he wanted to be perceived by people and present. He wanted them to see him as a certain type of person versus who God created him to be. So when he'd put on an outfit, he'd be like, God, is this about me and me boosting my own reputation? Or am I just satisfied with how you created me and I need to be clothed, so I'm putting on clothing? And so I think with food,
it's such a personal and regular thing that we don't always think about bringing God into the conversation. We'll thank him for what he provided, but not bring him into the conversation of what we eat. And I think having a accountability partner, especially if you are married, I think because they know our habits, our dietary habits. And so, for example, with the ice cream thing of after a rough day at the office, having to deal with me, you go home, or like, let's get the pint out, to have a spouse say, how about you go and pray for just a couple minutes, come back. If you still want the ice cream, by all means, have the ice cream, but go and see if God can satisfy what you're really searching for.
Yeah, because there have been nights where I've come home from a meeting here at the church or whatever, and Meg can just see it on my face. She's like, what do you need?
2 ounces.
And I mean, the answer often is, I need some ice cream. But I don't need it.
Yeah.
I want it. And I want it to fill something inside, to ease something inside me that doesn't feel comfortable.
A dissatisfaction
of
something that's occurred, and looking to be satisfied via ice cream, via
fill in the blank.
Netflix,
it could
whatever.
be anything.
Like and I'm so glad you mentioned that in regards to like options or things that we go to after a stressful day at work, or visit with a friend or family or whatever it might be, that it's just so easy, the default of let me go home and do A, B, and C. And it's never let me go home and spend time with God. Let me go home and see how he wants me to act in this situation. Let me go to him for rest. It's rarely going to him. And so I hope that this series, but especially this sermon in particular, helps us lean on God when we come into those situations, and that we are bold enough to let people know that that is our desire and goal, because we're not going to naturally go towards it because we've already built our habits. So if we have someone in our home that can help us be the reminder for us, I think we'll see some amazing changes in ourselves, but also as a congregation. Before we close, I wanted to promote, I wanted to listen to the Screw Tape Letters myself, and so I was looking it up on Audible, and it's like 3-4 hours long. But if you have an Audible credit from a free trial, or from if you're already an Audible member, you can look up instead the C.S. Lewis Essential Audio Library, and it has over 38 hours of his works, not just the fictional Screw Tape Letters, but also 2 of my favorite being Mere Christianity and The Abolition of Man. It also includes The Weight of Glory and a few others, and so you can get a lot of really great works for free, technically, if you've never signed up. And audiobooks are a little bit easier for me since I'm not the best reader.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I hope that's a little taste that piques your interest.
Yeah. And then we already have an outro, right?
Yeah, you ready to go get some lunch? Well, that's our conversation for today. But that doesn't mean the conversation is over. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these topics as well. To ask a question about anything we've discussed in this episode, or to join the conversation, you can head over to fumccollingswood.org/podcast. Thanks for being part of this conversation.